Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. I would apologize for the late start. There was some technical issue for connection between Zoom and YouTube. I shall now request Narayananji at the Delhi Raman Kendra Shrine to initiate with puja. Sir.
ओम अच्युताय नमः, ओम अनंताय नमः, ओम गोविंदाय नमः। शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्याये सर्वविघ्नोपशान्ते। अयमूर्त समूसर्दोस्तु विमन्दो मन्दो नो कृणन्दो अयमूर्त समूसर्दोस्तु तदेव नगरं सदीनं तदेव ताराबलं चन्द्रबलं तदेव विद्याबलं दैवबलं तदेव लक्ष्मीपदे तेग्रीं स्मरामि। ओम गो ओम भुव ओम सुव ओम मह ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सर्ववाण्यम भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओम अवज्योतिषमृतं ब्रह्मस्वरम्। अमोपात समस्त दुर्द क्षेत्र श्री परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम करिष्यमाणस्य कर्मणः निर्विघ्नेन प्रसादस्थम आदौ विघ्नेश्वरूजां करिष्ये। पृथ्व्यां मेरुतुलसी सोलं चन्द्रकर्मदेवता पृथ्वी दिया त्रिदा लोकादयितं विष्णुना त्रिदा त्वं सतारिमां देवी गोत्रं गुरुशासनम् आगमार्थं तु देवानां कमनार्थं तु रक्षासां खण्डारवं करामि यादव देवदवानलाञ्छनम्। ममोपात समस्त दुर्द क्षेत्र परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम निर्विघ्न सिद्धत्तमादो विघ्नेश्वर पूजां करिष्ये। गणानान्ता गणपतिगं अवामे कविं कवीनामोमस्तत्तर्वं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पद आनुष्वनुसीदसादनम् अस्मिन् दरिद्राबिम्बे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिम् आवाहयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः औपचारिकस्नानं समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरम् आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदातम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः गन्धां धारयामि समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः गन्धोपरि अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः अलंकरणार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः हरिद्रा कुंकुमं समर्पयामि। ओम गणपतिये नमः पुष्पै पूजयामि। ओम सुमुगाय नमः। ओम एकदन्ताय नमः। ओम कपिलाय नमः। ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः। ओम लंबोदराय नमः। ओम विकटाय नमः। ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः। ओम विनायकाय नमः। ओम धूमकेतवे नमः। ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः। ओम बालचंद्राय नमः। ओम गजाननाय नमः। ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः। ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः। ओम हेरंबाय नमः। ओम स्कंदपूर्जवाय नमः। ओम सिद्धविनायकरे नमः। ओम शंकरमोक्षविनायकरे नमः। ओम आतुपुर विनायकरे नमः। ओम महागणपतिये नमः। नानाविध परिमलपत्र पुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। समर्पयामि। अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवसवितुर्वरेण्यं सत्यं दौर्बल्यं न प्रसन्यामि। अमृतत्वं नु स्वाहा। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा। ओम अपानाय स्वाहा। ओम व्यानाय स्वाहा। ओम उदानाय स्वाहा। ओम समानाय स्वाहा। ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। कुडगंड कदलीपळ निवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतोपसादुत्रापोसं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि। वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसन्नं साकणामि। ओम भू ओम भुव ओम सुव ओम मह ओम जन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओम अवज्योतिर्संभ्रममुर्मुसुरो नमो पात समस्त दुर्द शैत्वारा ही परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम सुबह शोभने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय परार्थे त्रिवेदे वराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरु दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाप्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रभादिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये शोभकृतु नाम संवत्सरे दक्षिणायने यमंत ऋतु धनुसु मासे शुक्लपक्षे चतुर्थी तिथियां शुभतिथौ भानुवासर युक्तायां शतभिषक नक्षत्र युक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ कर्ण एवं गुण विशेषिण विशिष्टायां अस्यां चतुर्थी तिथियां शुभतिथौ मम जन्म पापस जन्म प्रति एतच्चन पर्यन्तं मध्ये संभाविधानं सर्वेषां पापानां सत्य अवनोदनार्थम् अस्माहं सहकुटुम्बानां क्षेमसौन्दर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्त मंगलाभ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोषशान्त्यर्थं रमण महर्षिये प्रसादेन ज्ञान वैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षिये पूजां करिष्ये। तदंगम कलश पूजां स करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। शोभनार्थे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च। कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्रसमाधिर्थ मूले तत्र सिद्धो ब्रह्मा मातृगुणे समृद्धा कुशस्तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तचुरावसुरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो पतर्मण गंगे गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु। अंगैः जैता सर्वे कलशाम्ब समाजिता आयान्ति देव पूजार्थं दुर्दशकारगा। तंबूरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णुविष्णुकरे देवेश पूजिते पादने नमोस्तुते। देवो देवालय जीवो देवस्थानः अंजानि निर्माल्यं स्वयं भवने पूजे। ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्ति युक्ता योग पीडात्मने नमः। आधार शक्तिये नमः। मूल प्रकृतिये नमः। आदिवराय नमः। आदिपूर्वाय नमः। अनंताय नमः। पृथ्वी नमः। आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः। दश दिग्पालेभ्यो नमः। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम अस्सी प्राण प्रतिष्ठा मंत्रस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषि ऋक्ति सामधर्माणि संतांसी सकल जगत स्थिति सम्मारकारिणी प्राण शक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिम शक्ति क्रोम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठा ने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं दर्जनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आमनाभ्याभ्यां नमः हरिं घनिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम करदलुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम शिरसाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम सिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय षट क्रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व सर्वदि दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तांबोधिस्त बोधोलस तरुण सर्वकराब्जे पासम गोदंड मिक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचमाणा विप्राण सुखवालम तनरसदा पिनव सोरोटिया देवी बाला गौरना बहुसुग्री प्राण शक्ति परान ओम आम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं आम अम यम रम लम वम सम संह अंश सोहम सोमंश अस्यामूर्तौ जीवदृष्टुदु अस्यामूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्स सस्सोत्र जीव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपाद वायुपुष्टानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुखं सुरं दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा। ओम अस्सी प्राणदृष्टमुदस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषि ऋषि सामधर्माणि संतांसी सकल जगत स्थिति सम्मारकारिणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति क्रोम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठाभ्यां विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं तर्जनीभ्यां नमः क्रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम नाभिकाभ्यां नमः हरिं घनिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः क्रोम करदलपुष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा क्रोम सिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वषट क्रोम अस्त्रदाघट पूर्व स्वर्ग दिग्बंध असुनीले पुनरस्मात् सप्त पुनः प्राणमे नोइते भोगम जो पश्ये में सूर्य में तितम गुणियम या शक्ति आवाहितो भव सद्दाभितो भव सन्नीतो भव सन्निहितो भव अवगुण्डितो भव सुब्रतो भव सुप्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामिन् सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं विश्वावेन बिंबेस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु। नमो भगवती कुसेराय नमः कुबेराय नमः कुसेराय नमः कुबेराय नमः कुसेराय नमः कुबेराय नमः चतुर्नोति मंत्र जन पौर से मंत्रपा लक्ष्मी प्रदसीमानंद प्रिय ईश्वरा रिसाइट भगवान सा स्तोत्र करो। श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। अपार सच्चि सुखवारी राशोर्य शोर्मी मात्रम भवनम समस्तम गुणायुधम तम रमणम कबीरम चिंताविनीनम कीर्ति चिंतयामि। ओम महासेन महोम सेन जाताय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम गुरवे नमः। ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः। ओम महुजसे नमः। ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः। ओम जगत इदावताराय नमः। ओम श्री भूमिनादास्त ज्योतिदाय नमः। ओम पराशर कुलोत्तंसाय नमः। ओम सुंदरातलवत्पदाय नमः। ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः। ओम शयायाम्बा शयायवते नमः। ओम शोणासुर मोहलीन मानसाय नमः। ओम स्वर्णस्तकाय नमः। ओम श्रीमद्वादशांत महातले लप्त विद्योदयाय नमः। ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ओम परमार्थ विदे नमः। ओम दिव्यराय नमः। ओम पितृपदान्वेषणे नमः। ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृपदे नमः। ओम पितरादेष्ट शोणशैल प्राप्ताय नमः। ओम तपोमयाय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम महायोगिने नमः। ओम महोत्साहाय नमः। ओम कुशाग्रतिये नमः। ओम शांत संकल्प संभ्रमाय नमः। ओम सुसुंद्रुसे नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय नमः। ओम तपस्वीद सर्वंगाय नमः। ओम पुल्लांबुज विलोचनाय नमः। ओम चंद्रिका सुधाश्री मंडितानन मंडलाय नमः। ओम सूदवाट्याम समासीनाय नमः। ओम सूर्यदाक्र विप्रमाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांत तत्वज्ञाय नमः। ओम चिन्मुद्रणे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः। ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः। ओम विराजत सलाकृतिये नमः। ओम उत्थितनयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम रसिदासन तांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुब्रसन्याय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। ओम दक्षिणासीनिवाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ओम स्वराजे नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम तीराय। ओम महर्षिये नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईट्याय नमः। ओम उसके बाद क्या है? ओम भूम विद्या विशारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ओम आप्ताय नमः। ओम रुजमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः। ओम समत्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मृदुवाक्षिणे नमः। ओम दयार्णवाय नमः। ओम श्री सोनासुर इरुपूद स्कंदाश्रम निकेतनाय नमः। ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टरे नमः। ओम सद्भक्त वृंद परिपूताय नमः। ओम गणेश लिंगेन सेविता कृतरोरुवाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ संसिन्न संशयाय नमः। ओम वर्णासम मदाधीताय नमः। ओम रसज्ञाय नमः। ओम सौम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मवदे नमः। ओम सर्वावनि मदस्थाना महारात्याय नमः। ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ओम आत्मारामाय नमः। ओम महाभावाय नमः। ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः। ओम विनदाय नमः। ओम विनुदाय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम भावगोज्वलाय नमः। ओम दर्शनाद नमः। ओम मौनेन स्वात्म बोधकाय नमः। ओम ऋचातिकर्ता नित्याय नमः। ओम स्मरणात्मंद मोचकाय नमः। ओम अंधस्मिर चंडांशवे नमः। ओम संसारारंभतारकाय नमः। ओम सोनादुष्टिष्टरे नमः। ओम आर्थ विद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः। ओम अभि ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः। ओम कमंडलुदराय नमः। ओम सुदंडवाणीये नमः। ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ओम पवरोग पिशक्पराय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। ओम देवतमाय नमः। ओम अमर्त्याय नमः। ओम सेनानिये नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। कार्तिकेयाय नमः। मुरुगाय नमः। वल्ली दैवाने नमः। सुब्रमण्याय नमः। स्वामीनाथने नमः। दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः। नटराजने नमः। कालभैरवाय नमः। नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः। शिवपार्वतीये नमः। हर हर महादेवाय नमः। हर हर महादेवाय नमः। हर हर महादेवाय नमः। चिदानंद रूपम शिवोहम 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 चिदानंद रूपम चिदानंद रूपम शिवोहम 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 चिदानंद रूपम चिदानंद रूपम शिवोहम 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 चिदानंद रूपम। उपदेश सार कर्तुराज्ञया प्राप्यते फलम कर्म किंबरम कर्म दज्जनम कृति महदो कारणम फलम शाश्वतम निजगम इदम नेचया कृदम सिद्धसोदगम मुक्ति साधकम कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुत्तमं भोजनं जब चिन्तनम् जगतैषधी युगेवनं सिद्धजं जब ज्ञानमुद्दमम् आज्यधारया श्रोदशासमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलतपरं वेदभावना सो भावना बिदा भावनी मदा भाव शून्य सत भाव सुस्तुति भावना बलात् भक्तिरुद्धमा इरुस्तले मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्ति योग भो दाच निश्चितम् वायुरोदना लीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोध साधनम् सिद्धवायव सित्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्द्वयी शक्तिमूलका लय विनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदं पुनर्भवति नो मृदम् प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नासमेद्यत नष्टमानसो गृष्टयोगिन कृत्यमस्तिं स्वस्तितं यद दृश्यवारिदं सिद्धमात्मन चित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं दुगिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवात् वृद्धयस्महं वृत्तिमात्रिका वृद्धयो मनो विद्यां मन अहमयं कुतो भवति चिन्मत ऐपदत्यहं निजविसारणम् अहमिनाशवान् अहमहं दया पुरैरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिख्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अपनसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीतम नामसेकस जरा सिद्धयायहम् ईशजीवयो वेशदीपिता सत्स्वभावतो वस्तु केवलम् वेशानत स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनची ज्ञानमस्ति किं नादुमन्तरं किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा पूर्णसित्सुगं बन्धमुक्त्यदिं तम्बरं सुगं विन्दतीयै वस्तुदैविक अहमवेदकं निजविमानकं महतितं तपो रमणवाक्यं महतितं तपो रमणवाक्यं महतितं तपो रमणवाक्यम् अरुणाचल श्री रमणायन अरुणाचल श्री रमणायन
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for the first satsang of 2024. A very happy new year and may Bhagwan bless us all. We are fortunate to have with us Mr. Michael James for the first session. He shall be speaking to us. He shall be speaking to us on Anmavidai. I do not think after 4 years of continuous sessions of Mr. Michael James, I should be still introducing him, but a quick one. He had started his spiritual journey at Tiruvannamalai during his visit to India in 1976, where he stayed for over 20 years and has assisted in translation of Guru Vachaka Kovai, Nanyar, Ulladu, Narpadu, and other works of Bhagwan into English. Mr. James has been very kindly addressing devotees of Raman Kendra Delhi since 2000, and at this point in time, he addresses the devotees every second Sunday of the month. I shall now request Mr. Michael James to take over and please guide us through the next session. Sir.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Namaskaram. During recent meetings, I've been discussing the verses of Anma Vidyai, and the verse I've been discussing most recently is verse 3. So I'll continue discussing this, but I'll just to pick up the context again, I'll just read the meaning of verse 3. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, Tanne aridal indri, pinne edu arihil en. That means, without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, so what? Tanne arindidil, pin aria enne ulladu. If one has known oneself, then what exists to know? Binna Wegalil, Abinna Bilaku enum at Tanne, Tannil Unara, Minnum Tannul Amma Prakasame. When one knows in oneself, that self, which is the light that shines without separation in separate sentient beings, within oneself, the shining of oneself, Atma Prakasam, alone will flash forth. This is Arul Vilasame, the shining forth of grace. Ahavinasame, the annihilation of ego. Imba Vikasame, the blossoming of happiness. So that is the meaning of the verse. But though the verse seems quite simple, there's actually a huge amount of meaning and implication in this. So to explain the first two sentences, I had discussed various relevant verses of Uludunapadu, verse 4 and verses 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, and also verse 27 of Upadesha, all of which are, help us to understand the implication of these first two sentences. So I will now take up from where I left off last time. The reason I've discussed all these verses of Uludunapanu Upadesha in so much detail here is that they explain exactly why he says and what he implies by saying in the first two sentences of this third verse of Anma Vidyai, Tanne aridal indri, pinne edu arihil en. Without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, so what? Tanne arindidil, pin ene uludu arya. If one has known oneself, what else exists to know? As he says in the first two lines of verse 11 of Uludunapadu, Arivurum tanne ariadu, ayale arivadu ariyame, andri arivo. Not knowing oneself who knows, knowing other things is ignorance. Except that is it knowledge, because nothing other than ourself actually exists. So all other things are just an illusory appearance. That is, since nothing other than ourself actually exists, knowing anything other than ourself is not real knowledge, it's only ignorance, because we're knowing what doesn't exist as if it existed. This is why he asks rhetorically in the first sentence of this third verse of Anma Vidyai, Tanne aridal indri, pinne edu arihil en. Without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, so what? Thereby implying that knowledge or awareness of anything other than ourself is of no real value or consequence at all, because it is not real, being just a mental fabrication. That is, knowing something that doesn't actually exist but merely seems to exist cannot be real knowledge, because we are knowing something as if it's existing but doesn't actually exist. So that is not real knowledge, that is only ignorance, according to Bhagavan. And as he says in the last two lines of the same verse, namely verse 11 of Uludunapadu, Arivu ayaku adara tanne aria. Arivu ariame arum. When one knows oneself, the support for knowledge and yaba, namely ignorance, knowledge and ignorance will cease. Because knowledge and ignorance about anything other than ourself exists only in the view of ourself as ego. And since ego is just a false awareness of ourself, that is an awareness of ourself as something other than what we actually are, it will cease to exist as soon as we know ourselves as we actually are. And hence knowledge and ignorance about everything else will cease to exist along with it. This is why he asks rhetorically in the second sentence of this third verse of Amabide, if one tanne arindidil pin enne uladu arya. If one has known oneself, then what else exists to know? Thereby implying that when we know ourselves as we actually are, nothing other than ourself exists for us to know. So all that I've explained so far is the meaning and implication of these first two sentences. But now we go on to the third sentence, in which Bhagavan says, when one knows in oneself that self, which is the light that shines without separation in separate sentient beings, within oneself, the shining of oneself alone will flash forth. So long as we're aware of anything other than ourself, there seem to be many different things, some of which seem to be sentient and others of which seem to be insentient. And all those things seem to be separate from each other. However, when we know ourselves as we actually are, all separation will disappear. And what will then remain shining is ourself alone. Because what seemed to be many different things is only ourself, which is the one infinite and indivisible whole, as Bhagavan implies in the next sentence of this verse. Binna Virgalil, Abinna Bilaku Enum at Tanne, Tannil Unara, Minnum Tannul Anma Prakasame. When one knows in oneself, that self, which is the light that shines without separation in separate sentient beings, within oneself, the shining of oneself will flash forth. Binnam means broken, divided, separated, distinct, or different. And abinnam means the opposite, namely undivided or not separated. So binna virgalil, abinna vilaku, means the undivided light in separate sentient beings, or the light that shines without separation or division in separate sentient beings, implying the one indivisible light of pure awareness which shines as I am in the heart of every Veer. Veer means soul or jiva or sentient being. Since we as ego always identify a body as I, and since we see many other bodies that seem to be as sentient as this body seems to be, in our view, each separate body seems to be a separate I. So it appears to us that there are many distinct I's. However, what shines as I in each living body is only the one real I, which is indivisible. So it is only because this one I seems to be reflected in many separate bodies that it seems as if there are many separate I's. So long as we are aware of ourselves as a body, we seem to be separate from every other body. But if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, we will be aware of ourselves as we actually are, namely as the one infinite and indivisible light of pure awareness, which is what always shines within ourselves as our fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am. When we thus know ourselves as this pure I am, which is the one infinite and indivisible light of awareness that shines without the slightest division or separation in all the seemingly divided and separate sentient beings, all the seeming divisions and distinctions will be swallowed in the infinite brightness of that light, which will shine forth like a flash of lightning, as Bhagavan implies in this sentence. Binna Via Galil, Abinna Bilaku Enum, At Tanne, Tannil Unara, Minnum, Tannul, Amma Prakasame. When one knows in oneself that self, which is the undivided light in separate sentient beings, within oneself, the shining of oneself alone will flash forth. As he implies by saying, Abinna Vilaku Enum At Tanne, that self which is the undivided light, we ourselves are the undivided light of pure awareness. So to know that light as it is, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. And to know ourselves as we actually are, we need to look deep within ourselves, thereby withdrawing our attention from everything else. That is, we who need to know ourselves as we actually are, our ego, the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. So within this adjunct conflated awareness, we need to know the fundamental awareness, I am, which is what we actually are. And hence, this is what he means by saying, at tanne tannin unara, when one knows in oneself that self. What he refers to here as Amma Prakasam, the shining of oneself, is the same light that he referred to in the previous clause as Abhinna Vilaku, the undivided light, namely the one infinite and indivisible light of pure awareness, I am. Since the primary meaning of the verb minnu is to emit lightning, and the secondary meaning of it is to flash or shine forth, what he means by saying minnum tannul amapakasame, within oneself, the shining of oneself alone will flash forth, is that clear awareness of ourself as we actually are, namely as I am I, will flash forth within ourselves like lightning as soon as we know ourselves as we actually are. Since this light of pure awareness shines as I am without the least distinction in each and every soul or sentient being, it is equally available to each one of us. And since we can investigate and know it as it is just by attending to it keenly within ourselves, knowing it can never actually be difficult. So, aye atisolapum, amma bide, aye atisolapum, are extremely easy. Amma bide, Atmavidya, that is, knowing oneself, this light of pure awareness, are extremely easy. Since this light of pure awareness, which is what shines clearly in each one of us as our own being, I am, is alone what actually exists, it is the real nature, Swarupa, not only of ourself, but also of God and Guru. And since by its very nature, it makes itself so easily accessible to all of us, its shining within us as I am is grace. As Bhagavan used to say, God is always abundantly gracious to us because he is always shining in us as our own very existence or being, I am. But we are not gracious to him because instead of yielding ourselves to the inward pull of his grace by lovingly attending to him in our heart, we resist that inward pull by rising as ego and rushing outwards under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas, inclinations to seek happiness in Vishayas, objects or phenomena, attending to anything other than ourselves. Therefore, in order to avail ourselves of his ever-available grace, all we need do is to turn within to know or be attentively aware of Binna Vigalil, Abinna Vilaku, Enum at Tanne Tanil. In oneself, that self, which is the one undivided light of pure awareness I am, but shines equally and impartially in all separate sentient beings. So that is the third sentence. And then he goes on to say, in the next sentence, Arovilasame, Ahavinasame, Imbavikasame. That's actually 3 short sentences. That's the conclusion of this verse. So the implication is the flashing forth of oneself as the light of pure awareness is the shining forth of grace, the annihilation of ego, and the blossoming of happiness. So he concludes this verse with these 3 sentences. Arul Vilasame, the shining forth of grace. Ahavinasame, the annihilation of ego. Imba Vikasame, the blossoming of happiness. Thereby implying that this flashing forth of the shining of oneself, Atma Prakasam, the indivisible light, Abhina Vilaku of pure awareness, as soon as we know ourselves as such, is itself the shining forth of grace, Arul Vilasame, the annihilation of ego, Ahavinasame, and the blossoming of happiness, Imba Vikasame. The Tamil word Arul means the same as the Sanskrit words Karuna, Kripa, and Anugraha. In other words, it means grace, compassion, kindness, tenderness, love, or benevolence, which is the very nature of God, God, Guru, and Atmaswarupa, ourself as we actually are. And Vilasam means shining forth, appearance, manifestation, amorous play, playfulness, flirtatiousness, seductiveness, enjoyment, or beauty. In this context, the primary meaning of Arul Vilasame is the shining forth or manifestation of grace, because the shining of ourself as the indivisible and immutable light of pure awareness, I am, is itself grace. So the shining forth of ourself as pure awareness is the shining forth of grace as it actually is. Arul Vilasame can also be taken to mean the beauty of grace, in the sense that the full beauty of grace will become clear to us only when we know ourselves as we actually are. And it can also mean the amorous play of grace, in the sense that our shining forth as I am I is the culmination of the all-loving play of grace, which has been lovingly and tirelessly attracting, leading, and guiding us on our journey back home to knowing and being what we always actually are, namely the pristine awareness I am. That is, though grace shines eternally in our heart as the clear light of pure awareness I am, and though it is not only always pulling our mind inwards, but also by just being as it is constantly working in its own infinitely subtle way to purify our mind in order to make us willing to yield ourselves to its inward pull. It is only when we surrender ourselves to it completely by turning within with heart-melting and all-consuming love, thereby allowing it to pull us back into the innermost depth of our own heart, that it will finally swallow us entirely in its infinitely clear and bright light of pure awareness. This swallowing of us entirely, thereby making us one with itself, is therefore what Bhagavan describes here as Arul Vilasame, the shining forth of grace, the beauty of grace, or the amorous play of grace. In the compound term, Aha Vinasame, Aha is a form of Aham, is the form that Aham takes in Tamil as the first word in a compound. And in this context, it means I in the sense of ego. Vinasam is an intensified form of nasam, which means destruction or annihilation. So ahavinasame means the complete and utter destruction or eradication of ego. That is, since ego is just a false awareness of ourself, because as ego we are always wrongly aware of ourself as I am this body, which is not what we actually are, it will be eradicated as soon as we become aware of ourselves as we actually are, namely as I am I. However, even to say that it will be eradicated or annihilated is not quite correct, because when we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know that we are eternal and immutable, and have therefore never risen as ego at all. So what is called the eradication or annihilation of ego is actually just the clear recognition that no such thing as ego has ever existed at all. If we look carefully at what seems to be a snake, we will see that it is actually just a rope, and was therefore never a snake. Metaphorically, we can describe this as the death or destruction of the snake, but it is not literally the death or destruction of anything, because what was always there, namely the rope, is not affected in the least, and therefore remains as it always was without undergoing any change at all. Likewise, if we who now mistake ourselves to be ego investigate or attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will see that what we actually are is just pure awareness and was never that we will see that we are actually just pure awareness and were never ego. Metaphorically, we can describe this as the death, destruction, annihilation, or eradication of ego. But it is not literally the death, destruction, annihilation, or eradication of anything, because what we actually are is not affected in the least, and therefore remains as it always is, without ever undergoing any change whatsoever, since we are eternal and immutable. Therefore, what is called the annihilation of ego is such a complete annihilation of ego, is such complete annihilation that ego is not only eradicated for all time to come, but eternally, which includes and transcends all times, past, present, and future, as Bhagavan implies by saying not just aha nasame, the annihilation of ego, but aha vinasame, the complete and utter annihilation of ego. Imbam means happiness, joy, bliss, pleasantness, or sweetness, and vikasam means blossoming or opening. So imba vikasame means the blossoming of happiness, because only when grace shines forth as our own real nature, the clear awareness I am I, thereby annihilating ego, the adjunct conflated and therefore clouded awareness I am this body, will we experience the infinite happiness that we always actually are. As Bhagavan says in the first sentence, as Bhagavan says in the first paragraph of Nana, Sakala Jivagalam Dukam Embadindri Epodum Sukamai Irika Virumbavadalam. Since all sentient beings like to be always happy without what is called misery. Yavakum taniditilaye paramapriyam irupadalam. Since for everyone, the greatest love is only for oneself. Priyataku sukame karanam adalalam. Since happiness alone is the cause for love. In order to obtain that Manamatra nidrayal dinum anubhavikam tan subhabamana achukate adeya. In order to attain that happiness, which is one's own nature, which one experiences daily in dreamless sleep, which is devoid of mind, Tanne tan aridal vendum. Oneself knowing oneself is necessary. Adaku, for that, nana innum jnana vicharame mukhya sadhanam. For that, jnana vichara, awareness investigation, called Who Am I, alone is the principal means. In order to recognize ourselves as infinite and eternal happiness, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. And to know ourselves as we actually are, all we need to do is to investigate our fundamental awareness, I am, by being keenly self-attentive. Since we are always clearly aware, I am, nothing can be easier than just attending to this awareness, I am, as Bhagavan explains in the next verse. So, aye ati solapam, anma vide, aye ati solapam, are extremely easy. Atma Vidya are extremely easy. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. So this is the conclusion of my explanation of this third verse of Atma Vidya. Does anyone have any questions to ask about this, or shall I? How are we doing for time? Should I continue, make a start on the next verse, or?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Do we have any questions? Have any
No, sir.
questions come? No.
No, sir. Oh, no.
Okay.
Not yet.
So we still have more time, do we? Shall I continue on the next verse?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the next verse is verse 4, which is the second last verse of Atma Vidya. What Bhagavan says in this verse is Panmadi Katu Ariva Jammadi Natam Era Emmagum Adinum Immagum Mikelidu. That means for the bonds beginning with action to be untied, to rise from the devastation beginning with birth, more than whatever path, this path is what is exceedingly easy. When he says this path, he's implying this path of self-investigation. And then he goes on to say, Sol mana tanuvin kanmadi siridindri summa amandu iraka amma ahatil anma jyotiye. What that means is, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, in the heart, the light of oneself alone. That implies the light of oneself alone will shine. Nitanubhutiye, the eternal experience. Iradu bidye, fear does not exist. Imbambodie, the ocean of bliss alone. So the meaning of the whole verse is, for the bonds beginning with action to be untied, to rise from the devastation beginning with birth, more than whatever path, this path is what is exceedingly easy. When one just is, sorry, I'm not reading properly. This part is, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, in the heart the light of oneself alone. The eternal experience, fear does not exist, the ocean of bliss alone. So this is all, Bhagavan expresses all these ideas in a very compact way. So I'll just try and explain it in, that is, slightly paraphrase this to explain exactly what Bhagavan is saying here. For the bonds beginning with karma, that is the bonds of action and all that results from it, to be untied, and to rise or be resurrected from the devastation beginning with birth, that is to transcend and become free from the miseries of embodied existence, samsara, which begins with birth and ends with death, more than whatever other path, this path of Atmavichara is what is exceedingly easy. When one just is, resting calmly as pure awareness, without the least action, without the least karma, that is, of mind, speech, or body, in one's heart, the light of oneself alone will shine forth clearly as I am I. Having thereby drowned and lost oneself, namely ego, forever in this perfectly peaceful and infinitely clear state of pure awareness, it will be clear that this is one's eternal experience. Fear does not or will not exist. The ocean of bliss. In other words, the ocean of infinite bliss alone will remain. So what Bhagavan implies here is we can untie ourselves from the bonds of karma and samsara only by eradicating the root of them, namely ego. And we can eradicate ego only by investigating and knowing what we actually are. In the first sentence of this verse, Bhagavan explicitly confirms the central import of this song, which Mudrana expressed in the Pallavi, namely that knowing oneself is extremely easy. Why it is so easy is explained by him implicitly in each of the 5 verses. And in this verse, he explains this somewhat more explicitly. We seem to be bound by karma and to be consequently immersed in the devastating state of repeatedly being born and dying only because we have risen as ego and thereby mistake ourselves to be a body, which is born, engages in action, karma, and dies. So since ego is just a false awareness of ourself, we will cease rising as ego only when we know ourselves as we actually are. Therefore, to free ourselves from the bonds of karma and thereby to rise up from the devastation of birth and death, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, all we need do is to keenly investigate ourselves by turning our entire attention back within to face ourself alone, thereby withdrawing it from everything else. One reason, therefore, why this path is much easier than any other path is that this is the only direct means by which we can know ourselves as we actually are. Whatever other path we may follow, it cannot enable us to know what we actually are until and unless it leads us to this path, because we cannot know what we actually are without investigating ourselves keenly enough, just as we cannot see what an object is without looking at it carefully enough. That is, since self-investigation, Atmavichara, is the only means by which we can know ourselves as we actually are, the easiest means by which we can know ourselves as we actually are is to focus all our interest, attention, and effort on investigating ourselves rather than wasting them on trying to follow any other path, which can at best only lead us sooner or later to this path. If we follow any other path, we are wasting valuable time, effort, and attention, but we could put to much better use by following this path, as he implies in the first sentence of this verse. Kanmadi kattu ariva, jenmadi natum era, emmagum adinum, immagum mikku elidu. For the bonds beginning with karma to be untied, to rise from a devastation beginning with birth, more than whatever path, this path is what is exceedingly easy. The first clause of this sentence, Kanmadi Katu Ariva, Avira, means the bonds beginning with karma to be untied, loosened, or opened. Or in more idiomatic English, for the bonds of karma beginning with, for the bonds beginning with karma to be untied. What this implies is for us to unravel and free ourselves from the ties that bind us to action and all that results from it, namely the whole of samsara, the continuous cycle of births and deaths, and all that it entails. We become entangled in these bonds as soon as we rise as ego, because we cannot rise, stand, or flourish as ego without grasping things other than ourselves. And grasping anything other than ourselves is an action. So the very nature of ego is to bind itself to karma and samsara. The first thing we grasp when we rise as ego is a body, a form consisting of 5 sheaths. And we continue grasping such a form so long as we stand as ego. Because as ego, we always experience ourselves as I am this body. So whatever actions are done by these 5 sheaths are experienced by us as actions done by us. Therefore, since we have created the bonds of karma and samsara by rising as ego, and since we sustain them by continuing to stand and flourish as ego, we can free ourselves from them only by permanently ceasing to rise as ego. We rise, stand, and flourish as ego by attending to anything other than ourselves, as Bhagavan implies in verse 25 of Uludunapadu. What he says in this verse is, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikam, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mika ongam, grasping and feeding on form, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvitu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. Hedinal otum pidicum, if seeking, it will take flight. Uruvatra payahande, a formless phantom ego, or investigate. What this implies is, that is, it's the subject of this verse is expressed only in the last line, the formless phantom ego. So what he's describing in this verse is the nature of this formless phantom ego. The nature of this formless phantom ego is that it comes into existence grasping form, it stands grasping form, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly, and leaving form, it grasps form. So grasping form is the very nature of ego. Since ego is formless, whatever forms it grasps are things other than itself. Here, forms, Bhagavan uses forms in a broad sense. He's not just talking about physical forms. Any phenomenon, any object is a form. Anything that can in any way be distinguished from any other thing is a form. So, in other words, all phenomena are forms. So the nature of ego is to be constantly grasping phenomena. First, it grasps the form of a body as itself, and then through the 5 senses of that body and through the mind, it's constantly grasping other forms. Through the 5 senses of the body, it grasps the forms of the external world. And through the mind, it grasps all the internal forms, the thoughts, feelings, emotions, likes, dislikes, and so on, memories, perceptions, and so on. So this is the grasping form is the very nature of ego. And ego cannot remain for a moment without grasping form. So if it leaves one form, it'll grasp another form. But the important sentence here is Tedinal otum pidicum. Tedinal literally means if seeking, it will take flight. It's usually translated as if sought, it will take flight, but it's not actually, Tedinal is not actually passive. It literally means if seeking. But it doesn't specify what is to seek what. But the implication is of if seeking, if ego seeks itself, in other words, if ego seeks to know its own reality, how can it seek to know its own reality? Only by investigating itself, by attending to itself. And if it does so, it will take flight. That is, it'll run away, it'll disappear. Because we seem to be ego only so long as we're looking at other things, so long as we're grasping form. So long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we're looking away from ourselves at other things, and we seem to be ego. But if instead of looking away from ourselves at other things, if we turn our attention back at ourselves, to look at ourselves, to see who am I, we find no such thing as ego. That is, we seem to be ego only so long as we're aware of other things. If we withdraw our attention from other things and turn it back towards ourselves, the one in whose view all those other things appeared, we will find no such thing as ego at all. Just like a rope seems to be a snake, only so long as we don't look at it carefully enough. If we look at it carefully enough, we'll see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, if we look at ourselves carefully, and so long as we don't look at ourselves carefully, we seem to be ego. If we look at ourselves carefully, we see, oh, we're not ego, we are just pure awareness. Since we rise, stand, and flourish as ego by attending to anything other than ourselves, can we cease rising and attending, rising and standing as ego simply by not attending to anything other than ourselves? Whenever we cease attending to anything other than ourselves, as we do every day when we fall asleep, we do subside back into our source, namely our real nature, Atma Swarupa, but such subsidence is only a temporary dissolution of mind, manolaya, and not annihilation of mind, manonasa. In order to eradicate ego, therefore, we not only need to cease attending to anything other than ourselves, but also need to attend keenly to ourselves, as Bhagavan implies in verse 16 of Upadesh Undiyar. What he says in this verse is, Veli Vidyangale Vittu, leaving or letting go of external phenomena, manam tan oli uru ordale, the mind knowing its own form of light, unme unichyam, alone is alone real awareness. So what does he mean by the mind knowing its own form of light? Its form of light is the light of pure awareness that shines within the mind as I am, lending light to the mind. So the mind's essential form is only that light of pure awareness I am. The mind knowing that light of awareness is itself real knowledge. But how can the mind know its own form of light? So long as we rise as ego or mind, we know ourselves as I am this body. If we turn our attention within to know ourselves as we actually are, in other words, to know ourselves as that fundamental light of pure awareness, I am, we cease to be mind and remain at that fundamental awareness. So the mind knows its own form of light only by dissolving in that form of light. As Bhagavan says in verse 21 of Uludunapadu, Unadal Khan, becoming food is seeing. In other words, only when we are swallowed by the light of pure awareness can we know that light of pure awareness as it actually is. We can, in other words, we can know it only by being it. The reason why we cannot eradicate ego by any means other than self-investigation is that ego is a false awareness of ourself, being what is always aware of itself as I am this body. So it cannot be eradicated by any means other than our being aware of ourselves as we actually are, namely as I am I and nothing other than I. And we cannot be aware of ourselves as ourself alone by any means other than being so keenly self-attentive that we thereby cease to be aware of anything other than ourselves. Therefore, since we can untie ourselves from the bonds of karma and samsara only by eradicating the root of them, namely ego, and since we can eradicate ego only by investigating and knowing what we actually are, this path of self-investigation is by default a much easier means for the bonds of karma, but for the bonds beginning with karma to be untied and for us to rise from a devastation beginning with birth. This is a much easier means than any other means whatsoever, because no other path is an adequate means to eradicate ego. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. I will continue explaining this verse next month, but I think this is all I can manage today, but I've got a bad chest. But if there are any questions, if any questions have been asked in the chat or in the live comments on the YouTube channel, I'll try and answer them now. Have there been any questions?
So there are no questions right now on either
Right.
Zoom or on the YouTube channel.
Okay.
And I do see that your chest cough has increased today. So
Yeah, I think that's all I can manage for today then.
yes, 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 please,
Yeah,
absolutely. And
yeah,
you've been extremely kind in spite of this cough to address all of us.
right.
Uh, Please do take enough rest, sir, and
Thank you, thank you.
we shall definitely meet you next week. In case any questions come to me via WhatsApp or email, I shall forward them to you.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, sir. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank
In spite of your health, you took the time to address
no,
all of
no,
us.
my pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk about Bhagavan and his teachings.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very,
Thank
very
you.
kind of you.
Right.
We shall now go back to the shrine, and I shall request Narayananji to close with Akshar Manamalai and Aarti. Actually, it's quite cold in Delhi today. I'm not sure if he's in the shrine right now. He might have stepped out. Mm, uh, Let me check.
Sir, wait a minute, Narenji coming.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rajesh.
அருணாச்சலவர்க்கேற்ற அக்ஷரமண மாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கருமருளி காப்பாய் அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலமென அகமே நினை அகந்தை வேறறுப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீ முற்று அபிநமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அகம்புகுந்தீர்த்து அககுக சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆருக்காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி இளம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா இப்பழி தப்புனையே நினைப்பித்தாய் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னையின் பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா உனையே மாற்றி அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று ஊழம்பிடா உன்னை கண்டு அடங்கி அழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்திப்போ என்னை களவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த ஊரக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகு அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கள்வர் அகத்தினில் போகும்போது அகத்தில் நீ இல்லையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவனாம் உன்னை ஒளி தேவர் வருவார் உன் சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா ஓங்கார பொருள் உப்புயர்வில்லை உன்னை யார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா அவ்வை போல எனக்கும் அருளை தந்து என ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல் அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி. ஓம் பூர்புவஸ்வ தத்சௌதர்வவாணியம் भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवशब्दप्रसवसत्यं ज्ञानपरम्यां विश्वा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा वाणी स्वाहा व्यानाय स्वाहा उदाने स्वाहा समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः शिव पार्वती महादेव नमः कुलगंड गोसीरं निवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपसुत्रापोषं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरं आसमनीयं समर्पयामि पूगीबल समायुक्तं नागवल्ली तलियुर्तं कर्पूर सूर्णसिक्तं प्रयुक्तं कर्पूर नीराजनं श्री रमण महर्षि समर्पयामि. नमो भगवते अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः सोमो वा एतस्य राजमागस्ते यो राजसं राजो वा सोमेन यते पुष्पवान प्रजावान पशुमान भवति चंद्रमा भावां पुष्पं स्वं पुष्पवान प्रजावान पशुमान भवति ओम तत् ब्रह्मा ओम तत् वायु ओम तदात्मा ओम तत् सत्यम ओम तत् सर्वम ओम तत् पूर्णमः अंतर्जलति भूतेषु द्वायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वं यज्ञत्तं वसत्कारं तं इन्द्रत्तं रुद्रं तं विष्णुत्तं ब्रह्मत्तं प्रजापति ओम तदावो ज्योतिषं ब्रह्मपुरुषरो कर्मणान प्रजयातने नित्यानगे अमृतत्वमानसु हरेण नाम नित्यं गुहायं विप्राजते तत्यदयो विसन्ति वेदांत विज्ञान से नित्यदार्था संन्यास योगा तदे शुद्ध सत्त्वाः ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परान्तकाले परामृतात्मरिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे तरं विभावं परमेश्वभूतं यत्कुण्डलीकं पुरमध्य सकुंसदं तत्रावित्तग्रमकगनं विशोग तस्मिन् तद्वादित्यं यो वेदांतो सुर प्रभुतो वेदांत सत्य प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमहेश्वरः मंत्रपुष्पं नमो महर्षि समर्पयामि ओम तत्ब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम।
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's satsang with Mr. Michael James. We shall reconvene next month, second Sunday, with Mr. Michael James again. Till then, Namo Ramana and may Bhagwan bless us all.